We are live. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story, once a week. I'm Anais.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Andy.
Okay, and we're back with a story about Chernobyl, which we were talking in Slack about how, having seen the Chernobyl HBO miniseries, it kind of, I felt like I knew even more, but it was still a good story. I liked it.
Yeah.
Andy, have you seen Chernobyl? It was Gerald and I talking.
I have not seen Chernobyl.
Oh,
okay, good. That's good. Because I've not only seen Chernobyl, I actually saw it just a few weeks ago while in a understand home order. So I rewatched it.
And the second time you saw it, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But what I'm saying is it's recent. It's very recent in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with Andy then, since Andy hasn't seen the HBO series. Andy, what did you think of the story?
Well, okay. So I don't think this was the right time to read this story.
Uh-huh.
Can
you elaborate on that? Is there something going on that...
Yeah, so there's this thing in the world right now called a global pandemic. And the story we read is partly about this little family and the brothers and like a dysfunctional family unit, but mostly it's a story about like overwrought politics and bureaucratic incompetence that exacerbate a preventable problem into a horrific tragedy, the scope of which we hadn't previously envisioned.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't need more of that in my life this week. I have enough of that already. Mm-hmm. And it made it hard to latch onto this story, which is probably fine. And then there wasn't enough of the dysfunctional family bit for me to hook into that. It's real because I feel like its intended purpose is hook into the story about Chernobyl and then also explore family dynamics. Where I was like, I don't want to know about Chernobyl. I'll listen to your family dynamics, but there wasn't enough of them.
But I would say that the family dynamics and the greater Soviet national dynamics are similar, and there's a parallel there, and that's the thing.
Right. Yeah, but also, I don't want to hear about Soviet political problems.
Fun fact: if you watch the HBO series, it's making the same point. So,
yeah,
go watch it.
So I don't want to watch that.
It's funny when I was answering the questions, and one of the questions is what is the family like? And I first thing I put down was dysfunctional, and I thought, but most families are dysfunctional in similar ways to this. So it's just painted against the background of what happened, and there are parallels between the family dynamics and the Soviet dynamics, which was quite interesting.
I don't know if most families, I wouldn't agree. Most families have some kind of dysfunction, yes. But is it this kind of dysfunction?
Oh, no.
I would hope not. That's grim. So since we're talking about it, why don't we start with the family dysfunction? I don't know who wants to take it.
Also, I don't know if you know this, Annie. It's on the show sometimes what we like to do is summarize the story.
Oh, we do summarize stories. Yeah. Okay. So go watch the Chernobyl series. That's a summary of most of the story. And then the other part is there are three brothers. I wrote them. I can't forget them. Wow. Boris, Mikhail, and Petya. But Petya, half brother. They don't really get into why he has a different brother, but he was raised like a full brother. It's the father's a nuclear physicist. So he calls him Half-Life as a joke, which okay, sure.
But he also wasn't raised like a full brother.
He wasn't, and he wasn't. He wasn't because
externally he was raised like a full brother,
right?
But internally,
right, to keep up appearances, he was raised like a full brother. But in actuality, he was mercilessly teased about the fact that he was a half brother and sometimes extra abused. They were all abused, but he was extra abused, which is fun. So the father is a nuclear physicist. He basically, he's very abusive. He beats them with an ash switch, leaves welts. But then when he's not abusing them, he says, reason was the ability to use the powers of the surrounding world without ruining that world, which, I put that right in the summary so we all have that top of mind because that's one of the things that I think are important. Anyway, so Boris, the older one, grows up to be chief engineer in the Department of Nuclear Energy. Mikhail, the middle one, is an engineer at Chernobyl at the number 4, power plant number 4, the reactor number 4, which is where the accident happened. And Petya has a bit of a layabout, and he's fishing in the Pripyat River downstream from the Chernobyl power plant the day of the explosion. So this family is very much tied to the explosion itself. And yeah, 2 of the brothers die from radiation, except Boris, the older one. He doesn't die. And he and his father go back later. Yeah. And I think that's most of the summary. Yeah.
I don't think Petya dies.
Petya dies.
He convalesces for the rest of his life.
Oh, I thought. Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. For some reason, I thought he died, but no, that's right. He convalesces for the rest of his life, and
right, he's horribly injured.
He's horribly injured, and he can't work anymore. And he makes a joke about how that's good because he doesn't want to work. So
right.
Never did.
He never did want to work.
And the thing is, I mean, you call it an accident, and it's debatable whether it's actually an accident. There are people culpable for what happened, I think, and it's quite interesting that in the when they had the big review afterwards and investigating the cause of the accident, everyone who was on the review committee were engineers who designed them, and nobody who operated them was on the committee at all, and they blamed the people who operated them. And there you go. Yeah. Most of whom were dead. So yeah, that sort of struck me as being so Russian, despite the narrator's sort of, I don't know, he sort of has a tongue-in-cheek skepticism towards the Russian way of doing things, I think. But he's more than happy to sort of fall in line with the way things are done.
Right. So yeah, let's go into that a little bit then. Or actually, one thing I just want to say is you said you don't know if it's an accident. I don't know. When there's human error and incompetence and people should have known better, but they still did it anyway, but their intention wasn't the outcome, it's still a mistake, right? And I think what we need to, it's just something I always think about because it's like, their intention wasn't to blow up the reactor. This wasn't an act of malice.
Right.
This is
a bunch of
terrorist
attack.
Right. It was idiots, but there was one key piece of information they didn't have and they didn't know that led to the disaster, which was they didn't know that the boron rods that bring down reactivity had graphite tips, which accelerate reactivity. They didn't know that. And that's because of Soviet secrets, which the HBO miniseries stresses a little bit more. Here he mentions it. He does mention the tips, but he doesn't mention how the government knew. They covered it up.
Well, see, I think that's a narrative point, though, right? Because like much later at the very end, that's the thing he's looking at in the blueprints is the design of those rods. Like that's his, like he's not stressing it in the narrative because that's his private shame. That's the thing he's guilty about.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the not stressing it is the point, I think.
Right. So let's hit that guilt thing a little more because you're talking about the thing he's guilty about. So what exactly is Boris guilty about in your view, Andy?
Like, you're right. Several things. Also, Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, yeah.
Yeah.
The comment section, yeah.
Right. So like the design of the reactor had that, whether it was a design flaw or just like a thing people should have known about, right? But then the fact that the operational staff had sent up concerns like, hey, some of the things we're doing are dangerous. These shortcuts aren't proper, but they've been sanctioned. And he theoretically was in a position where he could have changed them, but the political atmosphere was such that he just sent the concern up the line. And he's like, well, okay, I've done my duty. I have passed the buck. So like, right, each one of those was a spot he could have changed the outcome. Right. And then after the explosion, he's especially guilty about all the children who got radiation poisoning. Right. We're like, oh yeah, we could stop this now, or at least we could start managing what we know is happening, but we'll just pretend it's not.
Yeah. And so like I said, when I was saying this before we started recording, when we rewatched, when I reread the story and rewatched Chernobyl, but that guilt aspect in this story is right there in the first sentence, which I really appreciate when an author does that. When they like say, this is what the story is about in the first sentence, you don't realize it until you read it again. You're like, oh, there it is. So he says that he's talking about the burden of so much guilt. Everywhere you drag yourself, you leave a trail. Late at night, you gaze back and view an upsetting record of where you've been. So really, this is about that guilt. And then you have to wonder, well, why does he keep going back to his childhood, right? And that's, I don't know, Gerald, if you had any thoughts there. Like, what's the parallel between what happened in Chernobyl and how he behaved as a child in this abusive family?
I don't have any thoughts about that. Actually,
because well, really, the Soviet political atmosphere was abusive in almost the same way the dad was abusive, right? When Dad built the 0-meter diving board, Boris was complicit in getting his brothers to go along with it.
Right.
He passed the buck. Boris was complicit in whipping his younger brother. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think there's sort of like two things there. So that's one of the lines is that as a child, he imagined himself as his father's ally. So he would help sort of like not even so much carry out the abuse, but clear the way for it. And sometimes carry it out, but more just make excuses for it. This is what the father is saying. So he's more loyal to that abusive authoritative figure than his own siblings, which if you extrapolate that to then the nation, you're more loyal to the Soviet regime than to your own neighbor. But then the other part of this is there's that heartbreaking moment after their mother dies where Boris is holding Mikhail's fists while he's sleeping. And there's like a moment of tenderness that's sort of like secret. And it's like those moments of tenderness between the brothers are squashed. Like you're not supposed to value your brother more than that authoritative figure that abuses you. And that also carries out throughout the Soviet mentality. You're not supposed to care more about your fellow resident citizens in Pripyat than covering up for the regime, even when something horrible happens, like after the mother's death or after this accident, which I thought was great. Like it had both things. One, the way that he's carrying out the abuse, and two, the way that you're not supposed to care about the people who are your peers, essentially. Or at least not care about them too much.
Right. Yeah. Not at the cost of the regime.
Right.
Yeah, because the authoritarian regime is everything and dictates how you behave and to a certain extent how you think and how you should behave with other people.
And the thing that's interesting is you would wonder, well, why do people then buy into this regime at all that has all of this power and control? There's a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons, which is why I quoted that line in my summary that really stayed with me, it's the self-delusion. The father had a self-delusion about himself. He sees himself as a scientist and as a physicist, and he says he's quoting what reason is all about. What is reason? And he says that reason is the ability to use the powers of the surrounding world without ruining that world, right? And yet, he doesn't practice that. He doesn't practice that at all. So there's a way in which the Soviet regime also has these ideals and these values that they say that they espouse, but they don't actually live, right? They don't actually practice that. So it's a way in which that cover, that self-delusion spreads throughout the whole regime, which Boris is a part of.
Yeah, and it's like the communist ideal, isn't it? The communist ideal is that everyone is equal, therefore everyone gets an equal share of the community and the country's output. But actually, if you're a little bit above, and if you're one of the leaders and if you're one of the select few, you're a little bit more equal than the others. Mm-hmm. So how they practice it is very different to how they promote it.
Yeah. So we have a comment from Tato Diaz saying, isn't that confirmed by the Milgram shock experiment? Do you guys see a parallel between the Soviet regime and the Milgram shock experiment, or do you think there's some nuanced differences?
Don't know the Milgram shock experiment.
So that's the one where you're asked to come in as part of an experiment. You're told there's someone on the other side of the wall who every time you push they're trying to see how pain reinforces learning. So every time you ask them questions, every time they give you a wrong answer, you shock them. Each time they give another wrong answer, you keep increasing the shock. And then there's someone in the room with you encouraging you to do that, saying it's perfectly safe, or I don't even know if they would always say it was perfectly safe, but the idea was you think the experiment is on the person being shocked, but the experiment is actually on the shocker, the person pushing the button, to see if they would continue to comply with authorities' directions, even as they're hearing the sounds of the person on the other wall who is, suffering. And at one point they even stop screaming and you think, did they die? Did they have a heart attack? And many people, the majority of people, kept pushing the button. Very few refused. I think there are some parallels with the Milgram shock experiment, but I think the nuanced difference here is with the Milgram shock experiment, there is such a direct link between the button that you pushed and the thing that is happening on the other side of the wall. I think there's something about the way that blame is shared in a regime that people may not even realize they're pushing a button as they're pushing a button until they see the Chernobyl accident in hindsight. I feel like there's something about the shock experiment that in the moment that you're doing it, you know what you're doing. Where I think sometimes when you're just pushing a report, you're just a bureaucrat, you're just pushing through the paper. You should know better, but it never feels like you're doing harm, right?
I think one of the things that the HBO series did better than this story actually was to show that there were stages to, we'll call it an accident, to the thing happening, and at each stage something could have been rectified and it wouldn't have happened. So it's like this, for it to happen, there needed to be several things to go wrong in sequence. And to the, in the HBO series, you had that supervisor who was saying, just do the test, just get on with the test, ignore everything, just get the test done. And had he not, then they could have avoided it. So I think, but with the shock experiment, it is more direct, it's more instantaneous. And I think the Chernobyl thing was more a case of people absolving responsibility and allowing it in hindsight to happen.
And there's a little bit of absolving responsibility in the Milgram experiment, which is, well, he told me to do it. The guy in the white lab coat told me to do it, but it's not quite the same, right? Because, and again, so I would say that the short story focuses more on the individual guilt that individual people carry with them within a regime, where the HBO series focuses a little bit more on what Andy was talking about, which was how political incompetence and cover-ups just sort of lead to disasters that could have been preventable, right? And that's a little bit what the HBO series focuses on a little bit more. But what's super clear in the HBO one, like Gerald was saying, was at no point did anyone think that any harm would come of this. They always thought they were in control. They always thought they knew what they were doing. So it's a little bit different, right? In Milgram, you're shocking someone, you're causing pain, and that there could be something.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And to a certain extent, it's sort of quite interesting drawing a parallel with what's happening now, is that certain things happened and then something else happened and something else happened which created this situation. But as countries, we've been allowed to respond to it in different ways. And it's been kind of interesting to see the people who denied it, not mentioning any names, who said it was a hoax, and people here who boasted about going into hospital and shaking hands with coronavirus patients. It's fine. We just take it on the chin, he said. And you think, and yet you see the other people who thought about it rationally and looked at the evidence and looked at what was happening and thought, right, we've got to act now, and clamp down on it and have averted the disaster. So it's quite interesting to see in Chernobyl, there was just one regime, one way of doing things, and everyone was just following their rules. And in this, it's happened, and we've all been given, each country has been given leave to react to it in their own way. And that's been quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things that's also interesting is now in hindsight, Boris, even though at the time he thought he's just a bureaucrat and he's just doing what is asked of him, and it never feels like any direct harm, right? In hindsight, when he has that clarity, it very quickly becomes clear who he should be loyal to, because both in his family and with the accident. So he has his guilt about what happened at Chernobyl, but also he asks Mikhail before he dies, was I a good brother to you? Because there's this way in which he feels like he failed at caring about his siblings in the same way he failed about caring about his fellow citizens, which ironically made him a good son, makes him a good bureaucrat, but doesn't make him feel like he's, it still feels immoral in both cases. Yeah. So the morals, they can't be denied in hindsight, I guess. What was the right side?
Yeah.
When the Chernobyl series first came out, it felt like, the lessons here apply to the debate on climate change. And I was like, the lessons here apply to what's happening with the pandemic. And it's like, yeah, maybe these lessons just apply across the board and we should learn them.
Yes, maybe.
That would be nice.
That would be nice.
Yeah, I'd like to think, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But and now I know we're going a little bit off topic now when we talk about what happens after this current situation. And they say, things will be different, and things, we'll have a new way of living and a new. No, we won't.
Because pardon me for one moment.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to depart.
Oh,
okay. Okay, continue, Gerald.
Because the people who sort of created the worst problems are just going to go back to doing what they did before. So there's no going to be sort of hippie, happy clappy, everyone's a nice sort of friendly people looking after everyone, and there's no globalization, and there's no no global warming or anything anymore. It's just going to go straight back to what it is. And because countries want to ramp up their economies again, so get everybody buying stuff and factories producing stuff, and we'll just go straight back to where we were before. Anyway, I'm being miserable. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So another comment from Tato Diaz saying Jamie Lannister brought up the hypocrisy of loyalty. And what I want to say is I also feel like in a lot of these cases, this loyalty is actually a cover for cowardice. In both Boris cases in the story, what would happen at Chernobyl, including some of the people who deny the extent of the coronavirus, COVID now, it's mostly coming from a place of fear and cowardice and just and masked as loyalty or sometimes patriotism, which is bizarre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, loyalty to a regime or an ideology which is incompatible with looking after the people of the country first. Yeah. It's regime first, then people second.
Yeah. So is there anything else we want to say about the story?
Oh wow.
I feel like we explored the main theme really well because again, this author didn't hide it, which I appreciate. Thank you, Jim Shepard. You put it right there. It was not hard to find.
I liked. I mean, one of the questions you said was, "What do you think of the prose and this sort of thing?" I didn't like the sort of section headings. I thought they were a bit superfluous and made no sense. But I liked the way he wrote was in a way quite Russian as well. I don't know how he did it, but it's very sort of clipped and very sort of matter of fact. And I quite enjoyed that. I quite enjoyed how he wrote it.
But when you say very Russian, very clipped, do you mean sort of as we understand Russian culture? Because when you think about actual Russian literature, it is florid.
Yes.
Yes.
Good point.
Russian literature
yes.
is, yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. But I like the prose. I think what I liked is how he stuck to the really long titles and the really long, which is again felt very Russian, just like the head of the this and the this and the that, and it just keeps going for a long time. It just kind of put you there. And the things that the narrator was focused on, I think also felt very Russian. It felt a little bit like I had to understand someone else's culture. without othering them. They didn't feel like I couldn't relate. I can relate, but it's not. I think like some of the. I don't know if that's true. Actually, I was going to say I feel like some of the decisions that Boris made as an adult felt like not necessarily American, but that's not true. It comes down to what your position is and how scared you are. I really think a lot of it comes back to fear.
Yeah, because they are by and large not a free people over there. They don't have the freedom of thought and expression that we do, and so yes, I would imagine you do have to be when you're in that situation, a lot of pressure, and you're in a position of authority, then you have to be very careful what you say and how you say it, and I can see how he sort of struggled with the sort of the family dynamic, but also marrying that with what happened. So I thought he did that very well.
And again, that's something that the HBO series focuses on more. That wasn't quite the theme of this one, but you see that a lot in the HBO series, how they have to watch how things are phrased, how they are said, how to not really pass blame in the wrong direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had more room to tell the story, I think, in the TV series.
And also, it was a different focus. Jim Shepard, I think, was focusing on something really different. He was focusing partially on that, but also specifically on the guilt that comes from just being a good soldier, quote unquote. Andy, do you have anything else to say about the story?
No, just that I really think I would have enjoyed this story more had I read it at a different time. Right? Just part of it kept being like, oh man, I probably would have enjoyed this, last year.
Yeah. Everything's kind of backwards, but
yeah.
Okay, so is it game time? Oh, ratings. We do ratings. Yeah.
And
there's these things we do on the show.
There's things we do on the show. Yeah. Everything's topsy-turvy. Plus, I feel increasingly like the ratings are just nonsense. Like my numbers are inconsistent. No, in terms of my own numbers, it's inconsistent. I'll be like, why was this one a 3, but that one a 4? I don't know.
It's just part of what we do.
It's part of what we do. Yeah. It's a good way to sign off, ultimately, since we praise and critique back and forth. It's sometimes I'm surprised constantly by your numbers. So
Yeah, and I think it's way back. Even BA before Andy, we had we said that we were allowed to dislike a piece of literary fiction because we didn't like it, and we didn't have to excuse ourselves. So I always feel that the rating is like this, despite all the discussion. You think, did I like it? Did I not? Did I feel it was a good story or not? And so, so yeah, I'm going to give it 4.5.
Okay, Andy.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3 because I think this was a much better story than what I enjoyed of it. Yeah, right. 3 is a nice.
I'm coming in highest out of 5. But I will say, when I first read it through, I was so distracted by the HBO series. Like, he mentions Akimov, who was in charge of the actual test. And I was like, that rat-faced bastard, because of the casting on the show. So, like, I had to read it again to, like, get the series out of my head. Yeah. Okay. So what are you guys submitting for next week?
Well, I shall submit again Two Little Soldiers by Guy de Maupassant.
Okay.
I am submitting Out There by Kate Folk.
All right. So I wanted a simple and easy quiz. So I am doing this a little bit Price is Right style. So we're gonna do Chernobyl by the numbers, and you're both gonna guess the number, and whoever's closest gets a point. And I have like 5 of these. That's how we're doing it. Yeah.
All right.
Super easy.
Fantastic.
So the first one. How big is the Chernobyl exclusion zone? Give it to me in kilometers squared. So Andy, I guess double whatever you think it is. Almost double, not quite double.
Right.
I'll give you guys parameters. It's in the thousands. Square kilometers. Okay, give me your guesses. Andy.
4,000.
Okay, Gerald.
45,000.
Nope, 4,762. Andy gets the point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay. How many people were resettled shortly after the accident? So this is not yet Pripyat, but everyone in the exclusion zone. How many people were resettled? In the hundreds of thousands. Andy, guess.
200,000.
Okay, Gerald.
I'll say 150,000.
350,000. Andy is closer again. Yep.
Wow, genius.
Mm-hmm. Now we're going to focus on Pripyat. That is the town that is closest to Chernobyl, where a lot of the workers lived. How far, in kilometers again, is Pripyat from Chernobyl?
I'd say 18 kilometers.
Okay, Andy?
7.
4. Andy again.
What?
Super close.
You're a Chernobyl genius.
Chernobyl genius.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no way for Gerald to come back now because there's only 2 more, but why not? Here we go. How much uranium is still inside the reactor core? This is in hundreds of tons.
Too much.
An excessive amount. How many hundreds of tons of your radioactive uranium are still in there?
No, really, hundreds of tons.
Mm-hmm.
350 tons.
Andy?
500 tons.
Nope, Gerald, 200. Gerald got that one.
Wow.
He's on the board. Also, here's something I didn't know until I started looking at this quiz. So there was 4 reactors at Chernobyl. It's the 4th one that exploded. The other 3, they reopened them and kept using them to generate power for a while. Until what year did they decide this is a bad idea and close down those reactors? What year did they close those down?
I think it's got to be very recent. 2006.
No. Andy?
95.
99. Andy's closer.
Hey, well done.
99.
99?
I don't know why at 99. This is my headcanon based on 0 facts. Nobody quote me on this. But imagine if the reason why was because of Y2K. Like they thought the numbers would lead to some other catastrophe. Now, that's probably not true, but I wish it was. I wish it was because of Y2K. Something came out of it. The clocks. They won't know.
Yeah. Could be.
All right.
Be.
So, Andy, what are we reading next week?
We're reading Out There by Kate Folk.
Okay. But before you go, share your deepest family regrets on our Facebook group, The Literary Roadhouse Readers, or on Twitter @LitRoadhouse, or our website, literaryroadhouse.com. Do you feel like the entire world is engulfed in a sort of crisis exclusion zone? Entertain your dark days with more Literary Roadhouse, and make sure your compatriots enjoy this reprieve as well by leaving a review on iTunes. It helps others find us. And we're going to start our own 0-meter diving team because it sounds fun, easy, and socially distant. Perfect for the moment. Contribute to our very obtainable goals and podcast expenses by contributing at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the youngest sibling you mercilessly teased in your youth. Until next time, read a good story.
Hooray.
Hooray.
Oh. Well done. We got it done. Oh, blimey. Clicked on the wrong thing. Bye, Anise. I just guessing she that's a bit abrupt. That's what she thinks of